Nobody. This is my cat. All right, go ahead and get this Kahoot going. It works better than last time. TBD. Tudo, stop it. Cat is rubbing his face on the computer. People one more time about that. We're probably not gonna be able to finish this thing because it's like 40 questions long. But we will get close. We will do as much as we can. All right. Okay, so if people have to leave during the game, that's fine. I'm just doing this for review. I will also put the Kahoots themselves onto Blackboard so you guys can play them on your own time if you want to. This is just so we can do them collaboratively and ask questions in real time if you want to. There we go. Oh no, the music stopped. Sad. One of the risks of working from home. Ooh. Might get a little crazy for a second. It wasn't even like half full, like it was totally full. I want to bring in the big guns here. All right. That's better. Okay, crisis averted. Everything's fine. Nobody panic. All right, let's do this. All right, the central nervous system. What's going on there? Brain and the spine. Very good. That is pretty much everything that's in there. Any other kind of nerve is classified as the peripheral nervous system, which is this thing. Are not part of the brain or spinal cord. So they're not only responsible for muscle movement, so they are responsible for things like digestion and increasing your respiratory rate, things like that. You can do a lot of stuff. Sympathetic nervous system. All right, so your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight system. I know it sounds like a very like, oh, nice and sweet kind of thing, but because that's what we think about when we think sympathetic people. But no, your sympathetic nervous system is, so like if you are being attacked, that is what is going to kick in. If you're being chased by a T-Rex, things like that, your sympathetic nervous system is going to pump a lot of norepinephrine, adrenaline to your brain to try and get you to move out of the way quickly or to react effectively. All right. Your parasympathetic nervous system. Not exactly the opposite of it, but it's sort of its partner. These things don't work in contrast to each other, they work with each other. A lot of these systems that sort of go back and forth. It calms the body. So this is your rest and digest system. So something that will, instead of increasing your respiratory rate, it decreases it. Instead of getting more blood flow, will actually slow down blood flow. So you can do things like digest your food and use the bathroom if you need to. What is the nervous system? There's so many things, but what is its main thing? It receives messages. That's exactly what it does. It also sends messages. Ooh, true or false? This is one you have to think about a little bit. Encephalitis is something we talked about briefly, but definitely a good thing to at least have a tangential understanding of. True, it very much does affect the nervous system because in encephalitis, part of your brain is swelling, which is going to affect the way that it behaves. And if part of your central nervous system is being disrupted, then so is your nervous system. So is the rest of it. Science is the study of the human brain. So a high-strung person, I just want to camp out here for a second. So If someone is particularly high strung, it might be because they have something like generalized anxiety disorder. It means that they have a low level of gamma aminobutyric acid that's being synthesized in their brain. All right, phrenology, something we talked about at the very beginning of chapter 2. There's not too many names or like sort of philosophies that you need to know for this, but this is one of them. So phrenology suggested that the bumps on the skull indicated personality traits. Now, do they? Absolutely not. But that was an early thought, trying to connect sort of the structure of the brain to different personality traits and intellectual capacities, things like that. Like I said, it is not a real thing. So the removal of sections of the brain to alter behavior is called ablation, which is also a thing that we talked about. But yeah, that is phrenology. So who founded phrenology? This is probably the one old white guy that you do need to know. Chapter 1, there are many old white guys. Chapter 2, just the one. That white guy is Franz Joseph Gall, and his phrenology theory is certifiably nuts, but he was important nonetheless. All right, ablation. We just talked about this. It's kind of an aggressive picture to represent a kind of aggressive idea. So with ablation, we are removing brain tissue to treat disorders. So we talked about hemispherectomies. That is a form of ablation. That is a form of, taking out a particular structure of the brain so that hopefully the rest of it can work a little bit better. And if you have something like epilepsy, which is notoriously difficult to treat, ablation might be a potential treatment. What's an axon? Axon carries the signal across the neuron. Very good. So that axon is sort of that subway looking thing that brings that neural signal from the soma all the way down to the axon terminal, where it gets passed on to the next neuron. What are the axon terminals? Good question. Okay, so I forgot to change the time delay for some of these, but it's okay. These don't actually count. So the axon terminal is the ending of an axon. You can kind of tell in the name. It terminates there at the end. But that is the point at which the axon terminal will connect to the dendrites of another neuron, and then that neural signal will continue. What is the myelin sheath? This is pretty important. Hold on. Very good. Myelin sheath works very similarly to insulation around an electrical wire. And it is created by your glial cells, which we talked about, sort of the support cells. What do axon terminals do? We talked about what they are and where they are, but what is their function? So they send information to the next cell. So intaking information from other neurons, that's going to be your dendrites that do that. Controlling the speed of electrical signal is going to be the myelin sheath, and then the glial cells produce that myelin sheath. Dendrites, what do they do? Dendrites receive impulses. So they are, you can kind of see, they look like these trees. They sort of work like fingers. That's the way I think about them. They're sort of out there in whatever tissue they're in and looking for neural signals. So if they get one that is particularly interesting, they will pass it along into the cell body of that neuron, and then that will keep going down that neural cell through the axon until it reaches the axon terminal, and the whole thing starts over again. What's the soma? The soma is the cell body. Okay, so yeah, so that's this like big globby thing here in the middle. So what's in the cell body? So you got your DNA of the cell that is going to determine what kind of neuron that is. So within that, you got like your ribosomes, your mitochondria, all that kind of stuff that is going to do things like power the cell and determine what sort of, is it unipolar, is it multipolar, all that kind of stuff. What is a synapse? Good question. So, speed round. Again, not a huge deal if you don't get this. I'm just going to talk about it. Okay, where two neurons meet. So, in this situation, so as this cat is realizing that he's about to fall off this table, as cats tend to do, his sensory neurons are going to send that signal from his little pose through. Well, it's going to get from the dendrites of one to the axon or to the soma, then it will pass down the axon into the axon terminal. From the axon terminal, it will connect to, not quite connect, but it will come very close to connecting to the dendrites of another neuron, and they are going to pass that signal along at the synapse. So the synapse is where the neurotransmitter from that sending neuron is going to pass that information along to the receiving neuron. And as that happens hundreds of thousands, millions of times, to this little kitten, he will hopefully realize that he's falling off the table, and he will adjust his body and land on his feet, because that's what cats do. They're very athletic little animals. What do glial cells do? Glial cells do so many things, but there's one sort of big umbrella thing that they do. Provide structural support to neurons. We talked about how glia, the root word for that, means glue in Greek. And so glial cells are sort of the glue that holds your nervous system together. They do all kinds of stuff like produce your myelin sheath. They protect your neurons from pathogens, things like that. All of it is in the effort of supporting them. Ooh. We're not going to need to know too many numbers, but there are two on here that we do need to know. So it is negative 55. So it starts at negative 70, and then as those positive ions flow into the neuron, if it passes over negative 55, at that point, that action potential is going to fire. That neural signal is going to pass along to the next neuron, then it's going to carry all the way up to the brain and then back out. And all this is referring to something called the R-node principle. What does that mean? a trickily worded question, but the all or none principle means that there is no change in intensity from action potential to action potential. It goes the same intensity every time. If it hits that threshold, that -55 threshold, it's going to fire. There's no like partial reaction. It's either going to happen completely or it's not going to happen at all. All right, what's reuptake? The reabsorption of neurotransmitters by the presynaptic neuron. Okay, so we talked about how there's a synaptic gap in between the sending neuron and the receiving neuron, and not all of the neurotransmitter makes it from sending neuron to receiving neuron. Some of it gets diffused across the gap, or some of it, in the case of reuptake, gets taken back up into that sending neuron. You can also limit reuptake through something called a reuptake inhibitor that will keep more of that neurotransmitter in the receiving neuron. Good questions. We're going to talk a ton about agonists and antagonists, but you will need to know what those mean. That is false. Antagonists counteract neurotransmitters. Agonists encourage neurotransmitter action. All right, so my like 4 or 5 of y'all that are still in here, we're going to do a few more of these and then I'll let y'all bounce. All right, GABA. Is GABA an excitatory neurotransmitter? False. GABA is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. So if you don't have enough GABA, your nerves in your brain are just going to be like all over the place, and it's in all likelihood going to create a anxious or a fearful response, and you might have a disorder like generalized anxiety disorder. All right, a couple more. All right, so glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter, so it speeds up neural activity. We talked about how if you eat too much MSG, which is monosodium glutamate, and you have a glutamate sensitivity, it can cause things like seizures. It can cause all kinds of problems, but glutamate is excitatory. It means that it increases reactions, as opposed to something like GABA, which is the opposite. All right, last one. You got to know what acetylcholine does. Really, it only does one thing that we're particularly interested in. Movement. Very good. Glad y'all were paying attention. All right. So we are going to call it for now. So if we are also going to have our review next week in the second part of our lecture, where we're going to go over pretty much the exact same stuff. I will also put the rest of that Kahoot up on Blackboard, so you can go play it fully through if you want to. If y'all have any questions, you can email them to me. I will post it's probably just going to be discussion board for this weekend, probably tomorrow, and then we will adjourn later. Y'all have a good weekend. I will see you next week.